everyone.
Doug's got to go back downstairs.
Doug's got to go back. So, we just have some more people coming in. And so we won't get started right away. We'll wait until that slows down. How are you? How are things going? I am loving this elephant. And the balance and the symmetry of it is just so pleasing to me. It's great. We wanted to thank all of you who filled out that what we call a start, stop, keep survey. It's super helpful. In many respects, it's way more helpful than the end of semester surveys that get passed around, because we can actually talk about them and respond in meaningful and helpful ways. So one of the things that we read from the surveys last week, for example, was that you would appreciate, some of you, but I wonder whether or not this is something that a lot of you are thinking, so you would appreciate sort of more text on the slides, more like just words to help. and for sure I can understand, we can understand why you might say that.
Words, more
helpful.
words.
Yeah. Especially because we go on about sort of the precision of language, so so I hope you've already noticed that we've added more words, and we'll do our best to add more words to help sort of with the precision part. Please don't memorize these words though, and we'll show you how not to do that today.
Just wait, before we go, did you compliment them on their pachyderm painting?
Oh, I did. Well, I didn't use those words, and that was great.
Alliterative, why wouldn't you?
The other thing, for the question where we asked generally how you're doing, I wanted to kind of share with you that a lot of you use the word functioning, which is way better than the alternatives, but it's not amazing. And so I want to just, kind of acknowledge that we're all kind of just functioning, right? Like a lot of us are getting through.
I talk about COVID coping.
COVID coping, that's good.
Again, with the alliteration.
Yeah, that's good. So COVID coping. Some of you are not. Some of you have some real struggles. And one of the things that I've learned is that the ones that have said that they are functioning have shared some things that they've done to help function. Quite a few of you actually talked about dropping a course. That's not necessarily the option if you're struggling, but that might be an option. To help kind of minimize the workload. A lot of you talked about dropping chem and keeping it for another time. I hear ya. And those types of things. The one thing that we do want to mention is that many of you mentioned that you're struggling with physics and chem. Totally normal. It's something that we hear a lot of, and once you get through it, that could be it if you're in a biology major, right? Remember, there's just like 1 or 2 physics courses. I don't think there are many chem courses that are required. And so, think about where you want to kind of put your focus and your priorities. First year is generally not a super big year as far as grades mattering goes. So get through it if you can. If you can't, keep it for another time. It also sounds like a lot of you are enjoying 1070, and we are really enjoying 1070, so we're grateful to all of you.
So thanks, and thank you for taking that seriously and contributing sincerely.
Yes.
Those stop-start continues are, they're important.
They're so important.
I mean, we have the office hours afterwards where we can hear from people, which is great, and we have we can set up meetings and talk to you one-on-one, but it's just a great way at kind of not the midway point, but kind of a turning point, almost the midway point, to hear about how things are going. And
the person that used the lichen pun, very funny. Particularly funny.
Was it?
It was good.
A pun?
Yeah.
Puns are hard.
It was good.
I say this as someone who says puns.
They said that they were liking the 1070. It was good.
I mean, what other lichen pun is there?
It was awesome. Okay. The other thing that we learned, which was new to me, is that there's
habitat happening.
Oh yeah, good. Grass. There are quite a few of you that are outside of the sort of average 1070 demographic.
Which is amazing.
Which is great.
Yeah.
So none of you are, for example, the oldest student that we've ever had in 1070.
Well, many of you probably think you are.
You are, but you are not, because Jim Watson is the oldest person on the planet and joined us a couple years ago. Very old, very wonderful, and delightful, and taking this course out of interest, which was amazing.
It was like Pelham Maple. I planted the Pelham Maple.
Yeah,
I'll tell you how it
yeah.
got there. I put it there.
And in fact, Jim was like a huge eye-opener for me in terms of accessibility and inclusivity and all of that stuff. So I'm so grateful to Jim. And we have a bit of a relationship now, even after the class. And so Jim's cool. So do not worry. The one thing, though, that was mentioned from the older demographic of students in 1070 is family responsibilities.
We get that.
We get that. We have a 3 and a 5-year-old.
Where the hell are they?
And so we hear you. And if you need anything, any of you generally, but also those who are in family care situations, please keep in touch. Please let us know.
Yeah, and probably some of those family care situations, whether you mention it or not, remember all of you are entering into a generation where they can go in both directions.
Yeah.
Your family care situation.
Yeah.
It might be
That's
3 and a
right.
5-year-old or a
That's right.
or grandparents, aunts, uncles, parents,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So this is I said it before, be kind, expect kindness.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, cool. Most of you are here, so we can get started.
Making a list, we don't check
Yeah.
it at all.
Okay, and so I'm going to clear the annotated, but you know what, let's screenshot it for sure, because it's beautiful.
Yep.
Save.
I'm gonna make that a video later.
We're gonna make a video. We post a lot of these like opening things on Twitter. If you want to search hashtag BIOL 1070, if you want, we kind of post the silliness at the beginning, where we can't actually post them on the YouTube.
No, because YouTube's very serious. Very
YouTube
serious.
Gets us for plagiarizing.
They say,
music
hey,
lyrics.
Shoshana and Alex, that's copyright infringement
That's
again,
copyright, yeah.
And
Okay.
we say, whoa, ho, 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 whoa, ho, ho, ho.
Okay, let's get started. Serious. So I'm going to clear all the drawings here.
Boo.
And
But thank you.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Delightful. Oh yeah, another thing is quite a few of you said the breakout rooms were a bit awkward. Not a lot, not like a ton of you though. So we may kind of, move back and forth with the breakout rooms. They're probably way better in the seminars though, I bet. So cool. Okay.
If we need some
Yeah.
carpets or wall hangings or something, let us know.
Okay.
We presume they have them. I always have. I think of the breakout room like the Star Trek, that blank box. What's Star Trek's Next Generation? What do they call that?
The
holodeck.
Yeah.
Holodeck.
Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna talk.
We're not going to get through anything
about some stuff today. And this photo in particular is quite an iconic photo. It's quite an important photo. And we don't usually talk about the opening photos, but it was taken by Dr. Grant.
Karen Grant.
Yeah, and who works with Dr. Grant. So the doctors Grant are quite well known, quite famous, established collaboration that has done some stuff with evolution in the context of ecology. And so if we don't yammer on too much, we're going to kind of tie it back to this photo a little bit by the end of the class.
Oh yeah, and we're going to talk about the Grants and the Lack and the Hutchinson.
Oh, good.
Oh, yeah.
All of them together. Okay.
Quick aside, these people could have been Canadian. They were employed by 2 Canadian universities and not given tenure for 2 people.
Yeah.
So they left where they could.
Yes.
Good for them.
And now they're at what, Princeton?
I believe so.
Yeah. So good for them. Okay.
That is a Darwin finch. Yes.
That is a Darwin finch. Yes. Okay. So here is the list. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but you can definitely go back and take a look and go, yeah, I know how to do that.
I will understand. I will understand. I will develop.
I will develop. Okay. Cool. Homework, though, was the first thing. We threw some homework at you. This one, you can probably figure out even if you didn't do the homework, but it would be probably a bit easier if you had. So here, I'll throw the poll at you, and we'll give you a few minutes to go ahead and do that. All the way down at the bottom, here we go, launch poll. Go ahead and take a look. I don't even know what the right answer is.
That song is still in my head. That's the foot tapping. Do we have a dance break now?
No, you'll distract them. They're working.
Okay, we'll cover the camera. 44 views already on Monday's lecture for some reason.
Okay.
For some reason.
44 people who missed it.
Yeah. Is there any chance that's from Ecological? No, that's from Greenland, isn't it?
No, it's from Cambridge Bay.
Ah.
Yeah.
Because that video was from Ecological, wasn't it?
The
they
cherry
from
cans are
Ecological.
from Ecological. Yeah.
Does anyone else hear a humming? That might be our humming.
No, we don't hear a humming.
I'm talking about it.
Yeah.
I think that's our computer that they're hearing.
Is it the Grant from Jurassic Park? That's awesome.
Let me just, I'm going to
Okay.
mute everybody and then unmute us, just in case it is someone, because it wasn't set. I'm going to do that somewhere. Where do I do that?
Mute all?
It sounds like where I would do it.
Over on participants.
Mute all?
Mute all.
Yes. And then us. Has to unmute.
Okay. Cool. Wonderful. Okay, so lots and lots of you have filled it out, so we can end polling.
It's us.
It's us? Really?
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. Okay, and now we're sharing results. So there you go. Good. The answer is indeed the one where the majority have registered. It is true that abiotic and biotic factors are important, and from previous class, we know that biomes, for example, can be classified and described entirely by their abiotic, and that as you kind of go down the levels of organization, the biotic factors, as you go nearer within geographic regions, closer and closer scale, it becomes more important with respect to the biotic factors. Did I ever not explain that well?
But you use lots of words.
I did. I obfuscated. Basically, the smaller the geographic region, the more important the biological factors usually become. Okay? Good. So some of you said I disagree. Only the role of abiotic factors varies a lot at different scales. Biotic factors are equally important at all scales. And so because biomes exist and because biomes are sort of classifiable by abiotic factors only, that would be a false statement. And I hope it's all good. If you have questions about this, stick around after class. We can talk a lot about it. The answer to every question that you will ask after class is, it depends.
Your mic
and then
is
we'll
off.
tell you why.
Your mic is off.
Your mic is off. Then we'll tell you why. Okay, cool. I hope that was helpful. Moving on.
Can I say a word just
Oh,
before we go?
yeah.
It's not interesting, it's a logistical word, but some of you were confused about the ordering. Between Dr. Robertson and I, we've reordered the lecture, so you might have noticed that today is 11, whereas the other day was 13. You know yourselves that time since March 11th of this year has been strange, and because of the Thanksgiving and the opportunity to have a bit of a break on Wednesday, we're reordering the schedule and reordering the naming structure, and that had already been built into CourseLink. So we're trying to update it, and if you're here, you probably have seen that, but
Yes.
you haven't missed anything.
We're working on it. We kind of got a little mixed up. We are going to fix it. All of it is going to be available for you.
Yeah.
And let us know if we've made a mistake somewhere. Okay, so getting back to our conversations.
Somebody's birthday is March 11th.
Oh.
So
Yeah.
happy global pandemic. It'll be always that'll be good.
Oh no.
In your family forever from now on. People will look back and go, I remember when.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more, diving in a little bit more about why species are where they are and not where they aren't. Both are different questions. So why is this species here, and then why is it not there? There are different methods that you would use in order to answer that question, and there are different possible answers. There's not always one single answer for why a species isn't where it is.
Hardly ever.
And more often than not, like especially if it's nearby and it's not there, the answer is because it just never got there. Not because it can't survive there or for some like real reason. Sometimes it's just because, right? Okay, our son asked us the other day, why are there trees? And then
he's enrolled in this course now.
Yeah, because we were like, not how are there trees, because that's an easy question. Why are there trees? That's like a whole other thing. We started talking about like just probability and coincidence, and then he got really confused. Okay, so these are some options. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's a pretty complete list about why something isn't where it isn't.
I like number 3 a lot.
Yeah.
Because it hardly ever, people think about it in terms of dispersal, that when it could live there but it never got there, so they immediately start tying that to how the wing size or the body size or the wind direction or blah blah blah. But I think one of the things that it calls into tight focus for me that I like to talk about with people is history and time. And all of these questions, we're asking them at a time that's important to us. And it's always important to recognize that all of these processes take place through time.
Yeah.
And so when you ask the question is incredibly important because it just may not have happened yet.
Yes, and it doesn't mean that it will happen.
Nope.
So, yay.
Nope. Yeah.
It depends, right? On so much. Okay, so one of the sort of two vocabulary pieces that we can introduce in this conversation, though, are the terms fundamental and realized niche. So we're going to go through that kind of quickly. It's kind of a neat idea. And hopefully you will feel like you've learned something cool by the end. Okay?
And niche.
And niche, not niche.
Oh my God! Never say niche.
Never say niche.
And you'll be deported to the excited states of America.
No, say niche.
It rhymes with quiche.
It rhymes with quiche. Oh, good. Okay. So we've talked about abiotic factors, right? And abiotic factors like light availability, physical barriers, all of those things that we've been talking about, temperature, precipitation, those two that define biomes, can be kind of rolled into biology when we talk about an organism's fundamental niche, okay? The idea is that an organism has a tolerance range, right? So you, for example, if you go outside, it better not be, much colder than minus,
we'll have different answers.
Yeah, it's true. So we'll have different answers. -20, and it better not be warmer than 40 degrees, or else like some serious decline is going to start to happen on either end.
Smith is a drippy puddle.
Yes, very drippy. So we have this tolerance range, right? Over the boundaries, right, across that range, on the other side of that range, things start to go downhill pretty quickly. And so our fundamental niche can be defined by the limits of those abiotic ranges, for the most part, okay? This is what it kind of looks like on a graph. So if we were to put the abiotic factor along the x-axis.
Let's imagine temperature. So we've got a low temperature towards the intersect, and then higher temperatures over here towards the other side. And we've got, and so then we're going to plot just like we did earlier. We could do this via polling here and say, instead of number of surviving, but number of prospering things. And so that's number of ants, in this ant species in this case. So we've got going up and up and up until there's some optimum. And then we see at either case, at low temperature and high temperature, limits where the species can't, and they might be associated with some physiological effect.
Amazing, Colton. Thank you for that. That totally helps. But it can be high or low anything, right?
It could be salinity. It could be
pH.
Moisture. It could be pH. It could be light. It could be all sorts of things.
Yes, absolutely. Super good. And so look, we have a normal distribution again.
That's just been noted by somebody.
Very
Jeffries,
good.
on
the sequel.
Yeah.
Thank you. Awesome. Okay, so I hope you're getting this. This is the idea that we survive and thrive within a range, right? Okay. Now, some species have very narrow ranges, and we're going to talk about that in the third unit when we talk about physiology.
Yeah.
And some have very broad ranges, and you can make predictions about their ranges based on their geographic distributions, for example.
Predictions about their responses to changes in those factors based on. So we plotted it here as like something that looks kind of normal, but it doesn't have to be like that. It can be, there can be more kurtosis, there can be skinning or splaying.
Or shifting, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so somebody asked about salinity, meaning, yes, saltiness, but it could be, you don't have to think about the ocean, you can think about the amount of, so sodium's a necessary thing for terrestrial organisms, and the farther away you get from the ocean, the less present it is in the soil, and that becomes a limiting factor.
Yes.
Like you might imagine here.
Well, or if you ever get to see the Dead Sea, if you haven't seen it with your own eyes, you can certainly Google it. That represents quite a barrier for ranges of things that can live there. But there are things that can live in the Dead Sea, even though it's one of the saltiest places in the world, right? So the thing is, we just showed you a graph with one variable, right? Which is so good, so easy, life is great.
It's elegant.
Elegant, right.
However, life
biology
is
is not
not
elegant. So imagine that instead of one environmental factor like temperature, Colton, if you want to put temperature along the x-axis again, you totally can. And then we had another environmental factor like photoperiod, or the number of hours that it's light outside. And then another environmental factor like pH. Hey, Colton. Okay, so imagine then that those are just 3 abiotic factors, right? But there are so many, right? Windiness, all of these things can be abiotic factors that matter. And so you end up creating this space. If you use 3 variables, you can create a 3-dimensional space where an organism has its ranges set, right? You can kind of create this graph along which you can identify the different ranges of tolerance depending upon the variable that you're using.
So this was a big deal. The idea that for ecologists you could plot this capacity or this potential space with fairly elegant graphing, fairly simple as was necessary in the 50s. But G. Evelyn Hutchinson was kind of the guy who came up with this idea, and he spawned an entire kind of branch of ecology. And a lot of what led him into this thinking was early work by another British researcher named David Lack, who worked on Darwin's finches, which we'll come back to in a second once we dive into a small pool.
Okay, so that's abiotic, right? And then, of course, there's all of the biotic factors that help to describe why a species is where it is and isn't where it isn't, right? And how does that relate to niche? It's complicated.
Would that it were so
Would that
simple.
it were so simple. So, we want to kind of just throw a little scenario at you, nice and elegant, nice and simple. Imagine that you have a fishbowl, and in your fishbowl is a little goldfish named Peaceful John. Now, of course, Peaceful John represents a species. So there's a species of Peaceful Johns out there in this little fishbowl, and everything's great. And Peaceful John's fundamental niche is defined by this blue space along two axes. You can imagine it a cube, though. This is Peaceful John's range of tolerance, right? So if we, for example, increase the temperature outside of that range, Peaceful John is smoked, right? Is dead.
That's an
That's
ecological
a biological term.
Yeah. Fundamental niche, realized niche, and smoked.
Smoked. Okay. Or if we increase the pH beyond that blue space, Peaceful John's not going to be very happy, right? That's Peaceful John's fundamental niche. And as long as we maintain the water in that bowl to be within that limit, Peaceful John is happy, surviving, and thriving. Okay? So that's fundamental niche. But we add biology to it, right? Badass fish gets introduced into the fishbowl. The water is the same, nothing's changing, but all of a sudden there's competition, right? From another species. And badass fish is not a nice fish. Peaceful John is a little bit upset, okay? So what can happen in this context, right? This is a biological variable that gets introduced. This is biological competition, and there are certain outcomes that can happen. What happens, though, kind of the high-level answer, is that Peaceful John's fundamental niche stays the same, but now the important niche limits are something called the realized niche. This is the actual niche within the fishbowl, right? The thing that we can observe in nature. So if you go out and you collect a whole bunch of data about the distribution of a species, remember, you are collecting data about the realized niche, not the fundamental niche, not where it could live, but where it actually lives, right? And that's the interaction with the biotic factors. Cool? Ooh, don't draw on that, you know why?
That's Jack's.
Because that's our son's drawing of his Halloween costume. He's going to go as a dragon with yellow wings. Okay.
We'll wonder what the niche,
Yeah, there's more paper
niche
down there if you want. Okay. Hope this is fairly clear. So, abiotic factors really speak to fundamental niche. There are some exceptions, so please start thinking about them, because then it means you understand. And then biological factors usually speak to realized niche. Okay, again, there is some cross-play, but we just want to kind of give you like the big trends and relationships between things, right? Fundamental niche is all of the possible dimensions in which a species can survive, and the realized is the dimensions in which it actually survives, right? Which tells us a ton about its biology, right?
I'd like to draw one way of imagining that.
Okay. Smith is drawing. It's kind of a scary thing. Look at that. Oh, okay. It's a paranormal distribution. Oh, this is good. Yep. Okay, go.
So, we've got a couple of axes there with your survivorship on the vertical and your abiotic variable, and your familiar normal distribution in the solid line. And so those arrows that I've pushed in from the side, those are arrows that are pushing in. Those are potentially biotic factors like interspecific competition that are saying you could be here, but I'm going to be there. And so that normal distribution that you might expect is, it's like, imagine packing people onto a metro, onto a subway. It's like, I could be here, I could sit with my legs all splayed out, but because I'm not any more important than anyone else when they arrive, I'm going to collapse.
That's awesome. Well done. Okay. Okay. So, a bunch of things can happen with badass fish in the bowl. Okay. Okay, and this is kind of, it's not an exhaustive list, but it's a pretty good list of
Yep,
like the
it's a great
three
list.
things that we
Yep.
want you to understand might happen, and which one happens totally depends on the biology of badass fish, the
scenario.
biology of Peaceful John, and like chance potentially.
And even
right?
upon some of the abiotic factors, because there are some
Yeah.
abiotic factors that have a harder edge than others. There's some that where more negotiation and eking out can happen. But if you're a fish and you reach the edge of the bowl, that's a hard edge. That is the end of the possible abiotic conditions.
Right. So the first one then, Peaceful John overcomes the hard edge and leaves. That's competitive exclusion, right? So with competition, there is exclusion, and somebody gots to go. So somebody goes, right? And that's entirely a possible scenario. The other one that we're going to kind of dive into a little bit is called character displacement. And with character displacement, it means that there's some kind of change, right? Some character or trait, right? You could call it trait displacement, where it moves a little bit, right? The distribution, that normal distribution of a trait kind of shifts. Maybe it's not a normal distribution anymore. Maybe it's a kind of skinny to the side distribution. But something happens with one of the species to basically accommodate the scenario. An example of that in the Peaceful John badass fish context could be that now all of a sudden Peaceful John is a nocturnal species and badass fish is a diurnal species. And so Peaceful John stays in the house when badass fish is active, and then badass fish stays in the house when Peaceful John is active. And so there's that switch, okay? That's character displacement. Or they just kind of eke out a living, but their population sizes aren't that big, right? So instead of being lots and lots of Peaceful Johns in the bowl, now it's a reduced carrying capacity, a reduced population size as a result of sharing that space with the badass fish species.
Yeah. So it can be harsh. It can be some version of harsh with the exclusion. It can be some version of just degraded capacity all the way to the bottom. That's kind of a continuum from top to bottom there of saying like, this is laying down the law to, okay.
Okay. Ho-hum. Yeah.
Like our sensei.
Yes. Okay. So, just a little poll that we're going to throw at you. Here's a question for you.
Just a little poll. Every lecture I go, there's another little poll.
Nice and easy.
What we're saying. There will come a day when you will pass away. We appreciate Peaceful John in the lecture chat. Peaceful John is too good for this cold world.
Okay, super. Lots and lots of contributions, and you're all getting the right answer. It's a super kind of quiz question type simple thing. Which one of these responses, what's it called? Focus less on just memorizing the term and dive into what the words actually are so that you can build meaning for yourself, right? Competitive exclusion. Don't just memorize competitive exclusion is, right? Competitive, competition, exclusion means get out, right? So kind of build meaning for yourself, and it'll be much, much easier to keep track of all of these terms. Okay, so end polling. The vast majority of you got it right. Very good. It is character displacement. Character or trait displacement means shifting or moving, right? So something's got to change within the species. Okay, super, amazing. Now.
So this kind of crazy example that some of you are probably familiar with because it's famous. We've known about these finches that Darwin collected since, not maybe literally, I mean, since he collected them, but also since lots of work was done by ornithologists in the 1940s, 50s, up until present day. This is super active area of the study of evolution and the effect of particularly fast or microevolution. So where the ecological timescales butt up against evolutionary timescales. These are amazing finches, Geospina ground finches, that are spread across different species across different islands in the Galapagos.
Have you been?
I have not.
Yeah,
And you have.
and I have.
I'm so jealous.
We should take our kids there.
Let's go today.
Yeah.
No, of course, they are not welcoming us there right now, which in itself is going to be an incredible natural experiment to see what a year's worth of reprieve of human
Tourism
does to some of the animals and plants within the Galapagos.
They do a really good job at the ecotourism. I got a job once. It was a dream job. I got paid to travel around Ecuador, and it included a cruise in the Galapagos, and I had to write a report for a company.
Tough.
Yeah, it was really hard. Wow, and they do so well. And one of the big rules, actually, this is a total aside, one of the big rules in Ecuador for ecotourism is that it has to be an Ecuadorian company with Ecuadorian employees. So if you are not Ecuadorian, cannot be a tour guide or an expedition leader in the Galapagos, which is brilliant, I think.
I agree.
Yeah, cool.
So coming back to this idea with the finches that Darwin had collected and sent back to the British Natural Museum, and in the 40s and 50s there was an ornithologist, David Lack, who started to look at these things and think, I think this is how these different ground finches are spreading themselves out amongst these habitats. They are different bill sizes associated with eating different seeds. And this was a great publication that he didn't make until the end of after the Second World War, and it was picked up by ecologists like Hutchinson, who was thinking about abiotic factors and how they affect niche and fundamental and realized niche. And so in this case, there's kind of an amazing natural experiment. So there's Geospina fortis only on Daphne major, and on Los Hermanos there's Geospina fulginosa only. These are different species with different bill sizes that eat different sized seeds. However, in the middle on Santa Cruz, there's both species. And what Lack's original measurements showed us, and that the grants then figured out to even further degrees in the 70s and 80s and 90s, was looking at character displacement. So the differentiation, the realized niche for the big thick bill that can handle larger seeds on Daphne major where it's only living, it is a bigger bill, but it kind of leaks down onto this overlapping area bracketed in red. On Los Hermanos, fulginosa has a smaller bill, but it kind of leaks upwards and can deal with some larger seeds. And so that's this version of their own version of this normal distribution of a trait. On Santa Cruz, where they live together, we see this displacement, or the niches are pushed apart. And this was a classic example and used heavily, cited heavily by Hutchinson is in building his ideas, his theoretical ecological ideas upon the work in the field of Lack. And Lack was important to ecology early on because he really didn't work initially from preserved specimens. He went to places and got boots dirty and on the ground.
And some of you seem to be pretty interested in the Galapagos, and I'm just pulling up some photos here that I took. which I should have probably prepared them earlier, but for example, here's one of mine. Here, we'll open this. There we go. Just a wonderful place where every island is like totally different, right? Which is what Smith just said. But it creates these like completely different contexts, right? For evolution to be able to understand it at a kind of like micro scale, right? You can go from one island to another in a single day easily, right? To be able to study it. So there's my kind of classic finch photo.
And that's kind of the fortis. I don't know which island you're on, but is it fortis?
I think so.
It's a bigger, crunchy bill.
Yeah.
And of course, they can only turn the bigger faucets, and little birds with littler beaks turn on smaller water faucets.
Sure. There you go. Yeah, just a wonderful place. And in fact, I took the photo of the large lizard that we use as the avatar for this Zoom account from the photos that I was taking. Blue-footed boobies and all sorts of like just incredible species that are there. So anyway, there you go. Amazing
and if you're interested
book.
in this kind of thing, so somebody in the chat has mentioned that they're currently reading Last Chance, C. Briskin reading Last Chance to See. And it is reminding you of this, and yes, it is. And so that Last Chance to See is a fantastic book. This is a slightly older one that Winner wrote about the history of so not just the biology, but kind of the sociology of the study of the understanding of Darwin's finches from Darwin to the grants. Late 90s, mid 90s.
Yeah.
Is this published?
Yeah.
So there's even more things that have happened since then, but it's certainly a super readable. Yeah, so
Totally.
contact your local bookseller, and they'll be happy to order it for you.
Good. And I think we probably have it in the library, and it's probably available online, so free.
Yeah, well, give him, he wrote it.
He wrote it.
Yeah, and support your local booksellers,
Yeah.
or they won't be there when the pandemonium, or the pandemic is done.
Yeah.
The pandemonium.
So there are lots of questions that we can ask, right? How do we figure out which of these factors is limiting the distribution of a species? And if we're talking about abiotic factors, is it easier?
What's that?
Do you think
Sorry.
to figure out like how would you determine which abiotic factor is limiting the distribution of a species would probably be easier to answer than which biotic factors are limiting the distribution of a species.
I would agree that there's a smaller number of things that you would consider, and that it would be a better first place to start.
Yay. Okay.
Yep. So yes.
Yes. Done. Okay. So you can do things. Some of the things that you can do are field observations of the actual range. But remember, field observations are filtered through a realized niche, right? Not just the fundamental. You can determine ecological tolerances. You can correlate environmental gradients and species optimum ranges, and I think that's kind of speaks to you in terms of some of the things that you do. You can do experiments, right? And you can do them on small scales or large scales. All of that totally depends on the resources that you have and the questions that you're answering, that you're asking. So if we take a look, for example, at distribution maps, so the kind of the first one about like the distribution or the range of a species, we might look at the distribution of something like the sugar maple. And everywhere that you see in green, so this kind of blob here that I'm outlining, speaks to the fact that there are sugar maple within that range, okay? And it turns out that everything kind of to the north of that blob has a monthly winter temperature that goes below minus 18 degrees Celsius. And then everything that's kind of to the south or to the west of that blob has a monthly summer temperature that's above 24 degrees Celsius. And this can kind of start to tell you a little bit about what might be limiting the distribution of the sugar maple.
Especially at a continental scale.
Right.
But one of the things that you'll find is that you dive in and so these kind of, I call them Peterson style guide maps, which is kind of like a paint can spills at the edge of the southern distribution and leaks north. And you look at it and you go like, okay, that makes sense. But the problem is if you fly from New Orleans up to Brandon, Manitoba, and you start driving north of Lake Winnipeg in the center of that graph, where this tells you that, yes, there's a smear of sugar maple to the north side of Lake Winnipeg. Do you see them? And the answer is, it depends, because the edges of these distributions aren't even at all.
No.
They're fuzzy.
They're fuzzy, right? So if we're looking at a continent, it looks like nice and smooth, right? So like, for example, if we go all the way to the far left-hand image, even that's not like zoomed out like what we were showing you at the continental level, right? But you know, it kind of looks like, oh yeah, okay, so I can put a line and make a fence, right? If I want to keep all of my trees to one side.
Yeah, so we're looking down at a mountaintop here and asking the question, where is the tree line? And if you only have the left-hand image, you're like,
You can draw
I
it.
can tell you where the tree line is.
Yeah.
It is there.
Okay. But then, of course, you zoom in and you see that there are all sorts of little blobs and blotches, right? Similarly, even at a continental scale, if we go back, there are little blobs and blotches of the sugar maple. And it may not just be about these temperatures that are explaining why they're there. There may be all sorts of other interesting biotic factors that are interacting.
This is a great practice for yourself kind of exam question to say, because I think naturally for me, and maybe yours are the same, when we show this figure, my eyes are drawn to the central principal distribution and not to the ephemeral stuff to the west.
And my eyes are drawn to the exceptions.
Okay, so find species. So the suggestion being for you is whichever one your eyes are naturally drawn to, write yourself, find a species distribution map, a range map for a species that you like. If you don't like sugar maple, but why wouldn't you? Because of maple syrup. And write yourself questions about why the species is there or why it isn't there, based on the distribution that you've found for tapers or jaguars or sugar maples.
Yep. And then if you're drawn to like the little fuzzy chaos on the side, which is like totally my thing, start asking questions about, what those conditions might be like. Maybe, one thing is like, is it possible that those are mountain ranges, right? And so maybe, because then the average temperature would actually be less, and so maybe that's why they're there. Think about sort of true and false statements that you can make, or plausible statements that you can make about what's going on around those sugar maples.
There's people criticizing the map.
Oh.
Which is great, because they're like, wait a second, I'm living in a gray area and there are definitely sugar maples here.
Right outside.
Yeah, so this is so I grew up kind of up underneath there, up near the blue sign in the Ottawa Valley, and there's tons of sugar maple up there.
Oh, yeah.
And in Quebec, and it's like, So imagine this as Mapleus, principally not in Canada.
Okay, so very quickly, because we are running out of time, but we do have some homework.
Tons of time.
No.
Tons of time.
Okay, so another way that you can study this is with a kind of experiment. And you can do this in the field. You probably should
especially with plants.
Yeah.
Harder to do with animals.
Yeah, although, beavers have been transplanted across continents for very bad reasons. If you ever go to Ushuaia, Argentina, where I used to live, being a Canadian in Ushuaia is not necessarily a good thing, because the first thing that people will say is thanks for the beavers. They've done tons of damage. They were brought there in order to try to have some kind of fur hunting thing, and it just didn't work, and then the beavers cut down like a lot of their trees. Okay. Surprise! So transplanting things needs to be done with the utmost care and ethical consideration, as well as ecological consideration. But this is the theory of a transplant study. If you want to start to understand why things aren't where they're not, move them there and see what happens, is essentially what a transplant study does, right? Where you take the actual range of the tree, which is here, and you take trees from the actual range and you put them somewhere else. Pretty easy, right? The one thing that you need to do, first of all, is to take trees from the actual range and put them back into the actual range. So not only do you have to transplant out of the range, you have to transplant within the range. Why might we do that? Let's check the chat. Somebody give us an answer. Why might we transplant trees within the actual range? Nice. Nice. Good. Yes. Control. Exactly. That species that you're working with may not be tolerant to transplants, right? So imagine if you transplant within your actual range and 80% of them die, and then you transplant outside of the range and 80% of them die. Is that informative in any way? Think about those types of things, right? What conclusions would you make based on that difference, right? So this is one of the things that you do, is you account for the fact that there is trauma to the plant by actually transplanting it, right? You're like potentially reducing their chance of survival. And of course, there's going to be a range where the transplant is unsuccessful. And the idea is to try to establish what that niche or what that space is.
Because essentially, as you start this experiment, you have an idea about the khaki shape. That's you know something about the species that you're starting to work with, and you might have an idea where it might end, but you don't know. That's why you're doing the experiment. So you don't know blue. So blue is filled in by the results, the X results where your transplant survives. So it's like, okay, it could.
Yeah. So, going back to tree line and this like fuzzy border, what limits tree line both as we go up a mountain or as we go north or south towards the poles? There are these like stark lines from space that you can see beyond which trees don't exist. And as a result of the climate crisis, one of the things that we're noticing is that tree line on a continental scale is creeping north, is creeping farther and farther north.
Yeah, and I think that's a neat thing just to talk about. We've talked about it in process a couple of times, but the similarity in effect and response to anthropogenically forced climate change in terms of elevation and latitude, and that's at the root because of the same driving abiotic factors.
Yeah. And so to kind of start to understand what the limiting factors are for tree line, we're going to kind of get you to think about an experiment that was done very similar to the one that we kind of described with the transplant. So there were some people, they took some trees, they planted them, right? And they came up with a pretty elegant design for trying to tease apart some of the factors. So they had 3 treatments. They had underneath a canopy, a herbaceous canopy. So basically that represents a shaded condition where there was competition for water, because if there are other species around, they're going to be competing for water. But there's also shade, okay? They had transplants on bare soil, so lots of light and no competition for water. And they had it on bare soil surrounded by a canopy, which represents lots of light, but with competition for water. Okay, so they're trying to like tease out these different treatments so that they can tease out which factors are the driving factors in their observation. And so here are the results. And so they had a transplant species in, for example, if we go up here for experiment 1, low light with competition for water, and this is the result that they got, 90%. They had in B, high light with no competition for water, and they got 44% survival. And they got high light with competition for water, and they got 19% survival. And the same then with experiment 2 with different results. And what we'd like you to do for homework is to just go through these results and make big conclusions about the effect of light and the effect of competition for water as is determined by the different survival rates, okay? And that's it.
So, wait, the trees did best in the harsh environment. We're not gonna,
Yes, take a look.
Interesting.
And why?
And why? What did they learn?
Yeah, so take a look at these data. I'm not expecting you to go, oh yeah, I can see it right now. No, like we have to go in, figure out which ones to compare it to. And come up with these conclusions. Should take you half an hour, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less, but just kind of figure out which are the ones that you're going to be comparing when you try to figure out whether light is a factor, whether competition is a factor, or competition for water is a factor, and kind of come up with big arching kind of conclusions. From
and think about harsh, but in what way harsh?
Yeah.
The other question is, just this is a good one, is experiment 1 and 2 completed with the same species? Yes.
Yes.
Trying to tease apart.
But it kind of doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So just work with an experiment 1, work with an experiment 2, okay? Yeah, keep them separate. Different conclusions, potentially.
So, we won't see you unless you hang around for a bit. We're not going to see you till next week. So have a great weekend. Be safe and happy. And aim at coping, and if you get better,
Yeah.
celebrate that.
Absolutely. Take care.
Take care of each other.
Okay, and we'll be back in a few minutes.
Ciao.